Good morning or afternoon, depending on which part of the world you're in. We're excited to have this webinar. We're going to get started in just a minute. There's a few more people jumping in as we get kicked off, so we'll give it just a couple more seconds. But thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We've got a great webinar. It will be with Spencer Barclay and Amelia Wilcox. We're going to talk about that link between mental health and financial wellness. I think it's a really important topic that everybody has an interest in, and I think can personally benefit from. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started here as people will pop in. Just a little bit of housekeeping as you go through and as you're listening in. This is going to be a very conversational oriented webinar, if you will. We don't actually have a slide deck or anything like that. It's going to be really a moderated interview, if you want to call it that, where I, not the subject matter expert, will be talking to two subject matter experts on the topic. So as you have questions, go ahead and drop them in down below. You can see the little Q&A marker at the bottom of your screen. Drop them in. We'll have the questions up, and as they pertain to what we're talking about, we'll bring them up. If it kind of goes a little bit off topic, we'll save them to the end. We'll do some questions at the end as well. So by all means, drop in questions as we're going through. That's kind of the fun part, if you will, about having a more conversational piece. So enough about me, not that we're talking about me, but let's talk about Amelia and Spencer and move things over to them. Thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't we have Amelia go ahead and introduce yourself and who you are, what you do, and then we'll have Spencer introduce himself.
Okay. So I'm Amelia Wilcox. I am the founder and CEO here at Nivati. Nivati is an employee mental health and wellness platform, and we provide everything from teletherapy and counseling to like meditation videos and financial literacy coaching, education type resources on our platform too. So it's a holistic employee mental health solution.
Excellent.
Awesome.
And I'm Spencer Barclay. I'm the founder and CEO of Savology, and we do employee financial wellness, digital financial planning, financial coaching, and financial literacy. And we have a great partnership with Nivati.
That's great. So what I want to do to just kind of kick things off, kind of break the ice, if you will, a little bit here is talk about that catalyst that kind of drove you to create the companies that you have now. And what it is that you like. So in your case, Amelia, we'll talk like, what is it about mental health that like drove you to create Nivati? Why is that the problem you decided to tackle?
Yeah. So when COVID hit and we started talking, so pre-COVID, we did on-site corporate massage for businesses. So we've been working closely with HR leaders for a really long time. And when we decided to just like start doing all these interviews and talking to these HR leaders to find out what problems they were experiencing, what kept coming back to us over and over again was employee stress, anxiety, depression, burnout. We're in the middle of the Great Resignation, and all of that relates back to mental health and how people are managing just like the amount of change and stress that is out there right now. And so I just saw this huge need. And what we were also hearing is it's like to get through to a mental health provider through health insurance, people were looking at like 6 to 12 weeks, just depending on, what health insurance they had. If they had an employee assistance program, same thing, it was just taking them forever. And those solutions just were not enough to meet the needs of the employees to help them solve their mental health challenges. And so we thought, you know what, we have, the team and the technology and the solution that we think we can come in here and help solve for that. And so we launched, we're about 2 years in to providing that mental health solution for employers. And that's why I went into it personally. On like a personal note, also like me, I've used therapy and different types of techniques. My background is in massage therapy. Would joke about how like massage is really like therapy, mental health therapy, because you get someone on your table and they're like spilling their guts and telling you about their divorce or, abuse they had as a kid or whatever. So it's a space I've been exposed to ever since I was like 19 and entered that world. And then, I've done mental health therapy with personally one-on-one. I've worked with psychologists. I've worked with counselors. My husband and I have done marriage therapy. I've got a daughter who's got depression and anxiety that she's been diagnosed with, and another daughter who's got ADHD and anxiety. And then my husband's a first responder. So there's like a lot of mental health challenges that follow, being a first responder and some of the things they see. So it's been so close to me personally, that when I saw this opportunity that was like, oh, there's a huge need, I think we can solve for that need. And I had the personal passion and drive behind it from my own experiences. It's kind of what brought me to where we're at today.
That's awesome. Yeah, the personal touch, like really, when you can scratch your own itch, as they say, I think makes for a great decision to start a company in that route. Spencer, how about you? What was the catalyst to driving you to create Savology and personal finance?
Yeah, I've spent the last 10 years in a combination of financial services and entrepreneurship. I've worked in very early stage companies across areas like credit, estate planning, retirement planning, 401ks, financial wellness, and HSAs. And over again, I kept running into the same problems, which is that people my age weren't very good with their money. And it became apparent to me in my personal life as well. I had friends and family members come to me and ask those basic financial questions that tell me that we aren't doing enough to teach people personal finances. And if they don't have answers to some of these questions, like how do I protect my kids if something happens to me? If they don't have answers to those, then their personal finances are more than likely suffering in multiple areas.
Right.
So when we in 2014 to 2017 ran a small company called Benefit Card, we built a 401k provider. We sold it in 2017 to a company called Health Equity, which does HSAs.
Yeah.
And what we saw in that time was that these individuals who had access to 401k plans weren't saving very much money. And even when they were given an incentive like an employer contribution, where there should have been virtually no reason to take advantage of that, we had less than 40% of people putting away money. And I said, if this is the problem that we have right now, where they're not saving enough money, like this could wreck an economy 30 or 40 years from now with retirement. Yeah. So I looked at that and said, I think there's something we can do about it. We did a lot of research and identified that financial planning has tremendous financial outcome improvements for people if done correctly, but it's very inaccessible. And so similar to what Amelia was saying about mental health taking too long to get with people, 98% of Americans weren't using financial planning. They don't use a financial advisor or a planner. Right. So they don't really know what they're doing with their finances. They haven't set the right financial goals. And if they were to do that, then they can have demonstrable improvements. So we wanted to make that financial planning more accessible. And that's where Savology was born, building digital financial plans for people.
So just go back what you said there. 40% of the people who had employer matchings were not taking advantage of employer matching contributions to their 401k.
Yeah, and that's significant.
That's actually really surprising to me, which kind of leads into some of the questions that we want to talk about in terms of like just the issue at hand when it comes to finance, right? Like this was shared with me from your team, but 77% of people are in debt. 70% of employers or employees report living paycheck to paycheck. And 95% of employees report that finances do occasionally stress them out. Like occasionally, it feels like a constant for me, but that's a lot of people who are not necessarily like financially prepared. And I guess it would make sense if you're living paycheck to paycheck, even a small contribution to a 401k would really stress you out there.
Absolutely. And that's the reason we would usually hear is either they didn't know that they can or should take advantage of it, or they weren't in a financial position to do so. And when we're talking just a few percent of your income, right? And for most people, they have to contribute anywhere from 4 to 6% of their income to get that full match.
Sure.
It's not that big of a difference if they could make a few fundamental changes in their finances or in their basic habits. And those stats, I think, show what those problems are, right? If you're living paycheck to paycheck, what you're worried about is the next 2 weeks.
Right.
You're not worried about what happens 6 months from now or a year from now, let alone 20 or 30 years from now. And so they can't make an impact on their debt or their retirement savings. Because if you don't feel like you have enough money to live for the next 2 weeks, you definitely don't have enough money to pay off your debt, right? And to reduce the burden of your debt. And that becomes psychologically stressful to deal with, right? Because they're constantly bombarded with the financial problems that they face that they don't often want to look outside of that next 2 week period.
Yeah.
And you're saying that 70% of people are in that state.
77% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. That's a lot. Yeah. And I think some of us, after college, maybe we get our first job, we move on from the time when we live paycheck to paycheck and we forget about it. Like we've repressed those memories a little bit. And we don't see how many people, like our neighbors, that live paycheck to paycheck. And this isn't just people who aren't making a lot of money. There are lawyers making $150,000 a year, and there are executives making $200,000 a year. that still live paycheck to paycheck because they're not making good financial decisions.
Mhm.
And so it really does impact a lot of people, not just low income.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a great myth to point out. Like, it is not just low income people who struggle financially. It's anybody, right? And it feels like as my personal income has kind of grown, like my responsibilities of what I need to pay for, like kids growing up, whatever the case may be, has just grown with it. So like my ability to move beyond just paycheck to paycheck was actually a lot tougher, I would say, in a lot of cases with that. All right, let me point out a couple other stats that just kind of like jumped out. And what we're going to do is just talk about right now the issue around personal finance. We're going to talk about that link between mental health here in just a minute, and then we'll start talking through solutions of individual solutions, like what you can do individually to help your situation. And then we'll go ahead and jump into what employers can do, because we do have a lot of employers that are actually on the webinar today. So in terms of individuals and the responsibility or what they like or what they want from their employers, you've got things in here that say like 63% of employees find financial stress to be a major distraction at work, right? So like finance is causing stress, not just in the personal lives, but just in everything that we do, including work. Employees say employers should do more to address financial insecurity. And I'm assuming by that you mean employers should do more than just actually give you a raise, right? On that. 74% of employers would prefer to work for an employee that offers financial wellness. So it actually starts to sound like these employees are looking to their employers to help find the solution. What do you find there? This is your world a little bit more, but what do you see with the employees wanting the employers to be doing exactly?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. The first side of it, just thinking about the stress, is I think the why, right? If 95% of people say that they experience financial stress to some degree, and then more than 70% of those people say that that happens at least monthly for them and within the last month, and then 56% of the total population says that affects them at work, that means they're feeling it enough that they want something to be done about it. And
Right.
Usually they're not doing it themselves. And so you look at the other side of the equation, and the days of what employers have done have changed a lot. 40, 50 years ago, it was common to have a pension where you knew that your employer was going to be taking care of you now through the end of your life to some degree. If you keep working at that company, you will have a pension in retirement and always have income there. And that's changed. And I think we went through this temporary stage. You've probably seen it even in the mental health side of benefits, where employers stepped away and said, let's do as little as possible for our employees, right? Let's give them a paycheck, but then have the responsibility for what they do with that paycheck be on their shoulders instead of anyone else's. And that's why we moved to defined contribution plans, where they would do matches instead of fixed contributions in these pensions, right? And that's why the two basic benefits moved from that pension to a 401k and health insurance. And they stopped providing all these other things that can improve an individual's personal lives. And I think we're now moving in the positive direction back, where employers recognize the role that they can play, and employees are asking that employer to play a larger role across their personal lives in mental health and financial wellness.
So going to you, Amelia, on this, the amount of stress. So you're saying the employers are putting more responsibility for the individuals to do what they need. And that probably makes a little bit more sense, because nobody's sticking with the company for their life now, right? Like every 3.5 years, I think is what the stat is, a new job is around. But that is adding, I think, an additional layer of stress to the individuals. So you, on your side, see the stress. People are stressed out with their finances, but plus a million other things that are going on in their lives right now. How's the stress affecting people in their lives and what they're doing?
Yes, the biggest thing that we're just seeing is that people were already stressed like before the pandemic and election and, war in the Ukraine and just shootings, and like the world was already in this place where people were kind of maxed out, and they were just like, man, it is hard, his life is stressful. There's a stat that our lead clinician loves to share in our events that we put on our workshops, where she talks about what the definition for mental health is: to be able to manage and cope with it's like a regular level of stress, like a normal level of stress, right? And that is the state of your mental health. And she's saying we were already like above that and unable to cope. We were already seeing a rise in suicide rates. We were seeing tons of substance abuse and all these things, those are indications that like people are suffering and they're struggling because they're self-medicating, or they're just saying like, they're giving up hope because things are too hard. So we were already in that situation. And then like what happened is the pandemic came, and with the pandemic came like all these other things, and it just like piled and piled and piled and piled. And how that affected individuals at work was, first off, there's like remote work, right? So there's a huge portion of people that were sent to work from home, and like all of that change is really hard on people. So any kind of change is challenging. In fact, there's this whole other kind of phenomenon that's happened where like women have stopped promoting and even like left the workforce to be home with their kids. And they saw this, great movement of women leaving the workforce, and women not getting promotions. And it's because basically there's so much change happening in the family that women were like, oh, I got to just like hold down the fort. I can't afford to like go get a new job or take this promotion or anything because there's so much chaos in my family all around me. So these are some of the things that like individual people are dealing with, and trying to figure out how to manage. And so what is happening with that too, there's also like the great resignation that we've got going on. Right. And so what's happening to the people that are left behind while all these employees are leaving? Well, a bunch of your workforce left, and now the people who are left there have like this increased workload, and they're having to do more and more as well. And yeah, it just change and pressures and increased responsibility. And I mean, you just add all that stuff up. It just keeps going. So the result of that is people end up with burnout, which has a very negative effect on productivity, because if you're feeling burnt out, then you're overwhelmed, you have less of an ability to go out and start tackling all the things on your list. You just have like, it's like this feeling of hopelessness. And there's a ton of research backing that up, and statistics like showing when people are experiencing burnout, how much less effective they are at work. And so burnout is a component of it. And then just like the stress is being so high that people are just leaving. So as an employer, I'm thinking like, wow, how do I help my employees? First off, like, there's also increases in suicide rates too. We have actual employers that work with us that are like concerned about people staying alive, right? Like there's people who are like, we're really struggling and they need suicide prevention resources in place. So at the very far end of that is like, how do we keep our employees like alive? And then you move it back. And it's like, well, how do we keep them from crisis? And then how do we keep them happy, mentally healthy, prevent depression and anxiety? And then there's a proactive side of that scale where it's like, how do we help the people that are already healthy and maybe managing things okay, strengthen themselves, become more mentally fit is one of the terms people are using now. So how do we just like reinforce them and get them stronger so that they're protected against those modern like mental diseases of anxiety, depression, burnout? But that's a really long explanation.
No, I think it's really good to understand that like finance is probably, in fact, there's a stat, 41% of people say that like finance is their number one stressor, right? And I think that's one of the driving catalysts for why you brought Savology and financial wellness into a mental health platform. I think you're the only mental health platform that has that capability built into it, and it makes sense. But when you see this link, so I feel like I'm here to read the stats for you, and you guys can like explain this to me. 46% of people with that also have a mental health condition. And you're saying 77, 80% of people roughly are in debt. That's a lot of people with that and a mental health condition.
Yep. Yeah, but what I thought was interesting is Amelia explains all these other causes of mental health disorders and problems and imbalances. And that was before considering finances, right? If you add finances in there as a big stressor, it means that we have way too much on our plate to deal with. And things like debt push us over the top. If we have, some people will call it problem debt, right? A mortgage alone, being in debt with a mortgage isn't usually the problem debt unless you can't afford the mortgage. High credit card balances could be a problem debt. And when we start experiencing the problem debts where we feel like we will never come out from them, that's what starts compounding the mental health problems.
Yeah, it creates that sense of hopelessness, right? Where that can lead to depression. So I think the link is so high between mental health and finance because If you're living paycheck to paycheck, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm speaking in your space, but, and from my own experience, because I've lived through that, right? We had like a failed business and we were going to lose our house. I remember what that felt like. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you know, your anxiety level, it may not be caused from anything else. It may be like, hey, I was supposed to get a raise this year. You know, we put in a pool and I didn't get that raise, and now we can't afford to buy groceries. And that's going to create a level of anxiety for you. And maybe you don't need to talk to a mental health therapist about that, but maybe you need someone to teach you how to get a budget and get those debts gone, or, you know, help you realize that you need like downgrade in house or whatever the case may be. Like there's a solution for all of it, but I think people get caught in this like sense of hopelessness where it's like, it's too much, it's too hard. And that causes total emotional issues.
You need something to pull you out of this cycle, right? The cycle that we're talking about is if you have any struggles with your personal finances, right, and it causes stress, that plays a role in your anxiety levels and your mental health, and it makes your mental health worse. And as your mental health gets worse, it becomes harder to manage your finances.
Just like,
and that cycle just keeps going down and down. And I mean, it's a downward spiral that is very hard to get out of. And I think there are two ways to pull someone out. It could be by helping someone manage their anxiety or helping someone manage their personal finances. In some cases, you can do both of those at the same time. But either way, you have to stop one of those factors from spiraling down in order to boost that individual back up. And I think there are a lot of different things that we can do. We'll probably talk about some of the solutions, but that's not the only problem.
So, right? No, it's not. But let's start talking about the hope. let's bring hope
now
into
that
the
we've
conversation.
thoroughly depressed everyone.
I know, right? So there's this, those that are actually actively working on their financial wellness. There is a bunch of studies out there that say your mental health, those that are working on their financial wellness, actually have a better state of mental health, right? Like they're mental health positive, if you will. And that I think is a really good sign. So starting and actively working through that is good. So talk to me about strategies. What's a good strategy to start talking about financial well-being? Like, how do you break this vicious cycle that you were talking about?
Yeah. So one of the stats that we use at Savology really frequently is that 83% of people that prepare financial plans and create financial goals feel better about their money after just 1 year, right? It's not an immediate fix, but that's one of the components to it, is understanding your money. So if I could propose just a few options of things that can be done, I think Amelia will have a couple to add as well. Number one is talk to somebody. If you are currently feeling that stress, you cannot bottle all that up on your own and manage it on your own, especially if you're married, right? Sometimes it's beneficial just to talk to your spouse. But if that alone isn't working, then bring someone else into that equation, a trusted family member or a trusted friend or a financial professional or a financial coach. And we do perform some of those services at Savology, and we see firsthand how they help. Mm-hmm. But my first suggestion is just to talk to somebody, get it off your chest, how you're feeling, why you're feeling that way. And you'd be surprised at how often someone else has just a small tip or tidbit for you that can change your perception of things and help pull you out of the spiral a little bit.
You could probably talk a lot about talking to people, right? Like that's what your platform does.
Yeah. And it sounds like, just from listening to Spencer too, like it's like whether they're struggling emotionally or financially. And I mean, I think we're really hyper focusing on this population that is huge because it's 41% of 77% of the adult population in the US. So it's a huge, massive number. But just like focusing on those people, it's like the solution is like that they are stuck and something external is required to help facilitate pulling them out of whatever it is, whether they're stuck in a depression or they're stuck in a vicious cycle of financial, challenges. So yeah, I mean, talking to people on the mental health side is awesome too. What we have found though, it's a little bit different. I don't know that talking to a financial advisor carries the same stigma that like seeing a mental health therapist carries, right? Like some of them, I talked to my financial advisor the other day. It feels like, oh, you must be doing well if you have a financial advisor, right? It's like the complete opposite for mental health. If you're working with a mental health therapist, a lot of people are still not willing to take that first step. There's like,
Mhm.
whoa, I'm not going to do therapy. So for us, I mean, we have recognized that very quickly that yes, talk therapy can help a ton of people. But what about all those people who aren't willing? It's like half of people who need access to mental health aren't even willing to talk to a therapist in the first place. So how do we help those people? And that's kind of what I look at with what we're doing is like, well, maybe that person would watch a video on
Right.
teenagers struggling with anxiety and like how to help their kid at home. Or maybe they would watch, a video on substance abuse, living with someone with substance abuse, or, maybe they're in a really good place and they just want to focus on breath work and mindfulness and meditation. But yeah, that's kind of interesting. Our problem is kind of complex because we can't just say like, yeah, talk to someone and everyone's just going to do that.
Yeah.
Because some people just are not willing to. So maybe they'll talk to a coach. So we've got like life coaches on the platform, and we have seen that like some people are comfortable with the coaching
Mhm.
kind of experience, but they
But
won't
even
seek out
that
therapy.
sounds better. I talk to my life coach as opposed to I talk to a therapist, right? Like that stigma just is there,
Yeah.
and it's almost a behavioral kind of block to like make that step. But generally, I think what is it like 86% of people who actually talk to somebody feels better afterwards,
Yep.
right? They become more productive at work and find themselves in a better state. One of the things, maybe it's a myth, but if I'm in a financially decent place, or even if I'm mentally in a decent place, I think this almost carries through in both of your fields here. But if I'm in a good place, then I don't really need to talk to anybody, or I don't need financial planning, or I don't need mental support. But that feels like I say that out loud and it doesn't feel true.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that in the past. But that's why we draw a line in designation between financial advisors, financial planners, and financial coaches.
Okay.
It's because right now, 2% of Americans use a financial professional, which is an advisor or a planner, and they are using that because they have money, right? And so that person is helping them improve what is already a pretty good financial situation, versus the other side of it, which is financial coaches, which can help someone build from the ground up. So one of the problems we see on the financial advisors and planners side is when you go meet with someone who spends all day, every day working with high net worth individuals, you feel maybe a little more conscious than you should about your personal finances, right? You are less likely to give them all the information they need to help you because you don't want them to judge you based on where your personal finances are. So I think that it's equally as important to talk to someone, but you might be talking to a different person based on that stage of where you're at. If your finances are already good, you might want someone to be a planner. If your finances aren't yet good, but you want them to be, you might talk to a financial coach who can then prepare you with those basics so that one day you can work with a planner.
Right, right. So even those in a good financial position, there's a benefit to talking to somebody.
On our platform, more than 50% of the calls that we have are with people who are actually in a pretty good financial position. They just want to continually improve, and they have a mentality and a mindset of constant improvement, right? Some of these people have $1 million or more in net worth, and they look at that and say, I feel like I'm a little behind on retirement. It's because they think they can do better, and they can do better. Someone else can always interject and help in some area, even though you're overall performing well. The other half of them are those people who are just getting started and they're living paycheck to paycheck, or they're struggling with debt. We can help either side of those.
Right.
And I think it's probably very similar in the mental health side of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had never even thought there was like a population out there that could help people that weren't in a good place. Like I just thought it was like, oh, people go to financial planners and advisors when they have money and they want to build a plan of, well, I have all this money. I don't know. What am I going to do with it? I didn't realize that like there were people, because when we were getting out of debt, it took us 7 years, me and my husband, to get out of the mess that we had gotten ourselves into. And that I didn't know that was even an option.
They're becoming more popular. I don't think they really were around a lot, even 15 and 20 years ago. Even right now, when you do searches, the number of financial coaches are far fewer than the number of financial planners and advisors. And the main reason is because of compensation, right? Financial advisors and planners can make a lot of money from their clients because they manage people's money who have a lot of money. Financial coaches, when you're working with someone who is living paycheck to paycheck, they usually don't have a lot of money to pay you. And that's where an employer can really come in and help because an employer can pay for some baseline level of service to provide that to their employees, so it doesn't have to come out of that employee's paycheck and hurt that employee even worse to get the help. And I think maybe that's why you saw that they weren't as popular, but there are some available now.
Oh, that's great. And then I'm assuming same thing, like those in a mentally good position can still benefit from either talking to somebody, and maybe that's what they need to stay in that I don't want to say state of Zen, but in that good mental state, right? But also it seems like routine and other components are a big part of that too, right?
Yeah. So what we've seen is so our platform's kind of set up a little bit differently, where it's this holistic mental health solution. So it's not just like people just download the app because they want to talk to a therapist. Therapy is a portion of what we do. But a lot of people use the app for meditation or, yoga, or they just struggle falling asleep. So they want to listen to like sleep neuro music to help them fall asleep. Whatever the case may be, there's a lot of different reasons they can access the platform. So because of that, it doesn't carry the same stigma as like going through like an employee assistance program or something where it's like, oh, you're in a crisis if you need to use the EAP. And so I think it makes it more approachable. And the effect of that is that when I talk to employees, or I do an interview with one of our members, one of their employees, I will see that a lot of times it's people's first experience with therapy. They're like, oh, I thought therapy was just for people who are like having a nervous breakdown or needed to, were suicidal or whatever. And they're just like, oh, it was in the app, so I just thought I would try it. So when we're people's first experience with therapy, a lot of times those people, they don't have a specific problem. Their marriage isn't falling apart and they're going through divorce. They're like, I've been kind of stressed at work. I think I'll just talk to somebody, and they talk to somebody about it. So we're not treating people that just have like clinical diagnosable conditions and trying to just shift that mindset to like, oh, therapy is actually for everyone. If you're just feeling stressed or you want to work on a certain aspect of your life, it can help. And if you aren't open to therapy, then we've got all these other things you can do for, proactive strengthening your mental fitness.
I'm hearing that there are a lot of things other than therapy, right? Therapy is often what someone might turn to after they've had something happen, but it sounds like you also do things about developing good habits and becoming more mindful even before those things happen. And when we're looking at pulling someone out of a vicious cycle, sometimes you might want to consider preventing that cycle in the first place. And I think it happens on the personal finance side too, where some of those things you want to do are taking an inventory of your finances, right? Just starting to organize yourself a little bit better, which sounds like you can do a little bit on the mental side of organize how you think about things and what habits you have, and then start to improve in other areas, whether or not you talk to somebody.
Yeah. And a lot of times our mental health therapists will like build a plan for whoever they're working with, saying like, maybe that plan is like, we want you to do like this series of meditation, 5 minutes every morning, or practice this breathing exercise, or, things to even bring your blood pressure down, right? When you do breathing exercises, your blood pressure goes down and all those things. So helping establish those habits and building out a plan is definitely a huge way to pull people out of that.
Like a mental budget.
I like it.
We do a lot of physical budgets. When we meet with someone, even before we have dived into their whole personal financial situation, we're asking them how they feel about their money.
Right.
And then we start to help them organize and take inventory of that so we can decide where they might need help. And our digital platform can do that even before they talk to somebody. But then it helps that coach when they finally have a connection so that they have some baseline to go off of. Because it's not just about the recommendations. It's not just about the coach telling you this is what you need to do. Sometimes it's about you realizing it on your own, right?
Yeah.
Or just getting it out, getting it off of your chest. You don't always have to have the written budget, and the coach won't always have the perfect recommendation to fix your personal finances, but talking to someone can help with it.
So changing the topic just slightly, we have a question that came in, which I think really introduces what the responsibility of the employer is. And let me read this question here because I like how it's worded. The topics, mental health, finance, people's personal finances, money, suicide, those are heavy topics, right? So are there recommendations for the best way for the employer to have these conversations, or at least get an idea of what the concerns might be from the employees? How does a manager, HR person, executive team have these type of conversations with their employees?
On the mental health side, the biggest strategy we've seen implemented that has the biggest effect is actually just talking about it, right? So as the employer, bringing in, we do a lot of workshops where we'll come into an organization and we'll talk actually to the whole organization and just explain, like, here are the stats, like half of the people in the world right now have diagnosable mental health conditions. Like, that means half the people in this room do. And people are like, oh, so people struggling are like, oh, I'm not really alone. I thought I was just, jacked up in my head or something, and you're like, oh, there's a lot of other people struggling with this. In fact, people here on my team probably struggling with it. And then if we can loop the leadership team into coming in and talking about it, that has a huge effect. So if you can get the CEO would be amazing, but even the head of HR, if you can't get the C-level team in there and they can come in, and if they can share personal experience, that's like gold. It's just like, oh, as the CEO, I can come in and I can say, oh yeah, I've really struggled with this. And then your team sees that and they see that this is a safe place for them to be like, oh, it's actually okay for me to struggle, right? So it's all about talking about it. It's all about starting those conversations. And the more often you can bring that information and get it in front of your employees, in front of your managers, and create and foster this culture of like being able to talk about hard things, then people feel safe and they're able to get the help they need.
It reminds me of I don't know the exact quote, but Brene Brown, if you're familiar with her, really like teach this early on in her, and when she got real popular, about vulnerability, right? And these are vulnerable conversations, but people can only be vulnerable with people they trust, right? Like ultimately. And so you have to, I think as an employer, put yourself in a situation where your employees can trust you. And if they can't, then that makes that conversation like 10 times harder, if not impossible, right? It's kind of what I'm reminded of. On the money side of things, like money seems taboo in a lot of cases, right? Just talking about money, which is also funny considering the person who's paying you and giving you your income. But to have that kind of conversation, are there ways that you can overcome that conversation as well as an employer to an employee?
Absolutely. I think that in the groups that we've worked with, the highest level of success that we have seen are when they have an internal champion who's trying to lead an initiative around this. And that can be even without a formal financial wellness program. They can try to provide resources, help, webinars, anything else on personal finances to make sure that the employees know that that company cares about their personal finances. And usually that's like an HR director that's passionate about money, or maybe even the CFO. In a couple of cases, it was the CEO himself that just said, look, I learned life-changing money lessons early on in my career, and I want other people to benefit from those. And I think that sets the bar, sets the precedent to say the employer cares and it's okay for us to talk about them, and we want to help you with these. But one of the downfalls that I see, it's almost a catch-22, is that you occasionally then have employees come talk to your HR generalist about their money problems. And you don't always want those conversations to be had by the HR generalist, right? It's okay. It shows that they trust each other. I think that's good, but they should have a resource that they can turn to send those people to someone who maybe has a little more experience in that field. And that's where I think probably on the mental health side and the personal finance side, it comes into play, is they need a resource that they can turn people to, right? Help them understand that the employer cares about them and has resources for them, but turn it over to someone else who can help instead of that person trying to solve their personal financial problems. I've seen those go awry. I've seen people give bad advice on investments and credit and buying a home because the HR generalist thought they were doing something nice to that employee, but it actually can ruin a relationship. It can cause an employee to leave the company or end up in financial ruin, and you don't want either of those things to happen.
Well, and a liability to the company. That employee could come back and try. I mean, you could sue anybody for anything that could expose you guys to liability. But it's interesting because you say like you've seen like the financial things feed up into HR. What we see on the mental health side is like people don't feel comfortable going to HR, but they go to their direct manager. And so you're telling Mr. Manager of marketing, like you're struggling in your marriage, and he's like, well, I got nothing, right? Like I've never been trained on how to, like, what am I supposed to do? They don't have that close personal relationship with HR, so they don't feel comfortable just going in and spilling their guts to HR. So smaller companies, a lot of times they do, and I hear that all the time where HR is like, oh yeah, people come to me with their problems and they try to solve their problems. But I would say even a step further, what companies have to do is they have to train up their managers in how to respond. and manage those conversations, what to say, what not to say. Cause sometimes you're just like, oh, just toughen up, right? Like, I think managers, especially maybe like on a sales team where they're more like buddy, you know, you might be kind of dismissive. You don't really have the toolbox of like
Sure.
what to say. And then after that, it's like where to send them, what
So
resources.
training, not just HR teams on how to have these conversations, but managers in general, I think is important.
Can I answer one more piece of this question?
Oh yeah, for sure.
They also ask, you know, how can we get a better idea of what those top concerns might be? And we have seen a lot of success with employers surveying their employees to ask them what is most relevant to them right now. And it's not always just, hey, do you have problems with your personal finances? It can be at a deeper level than that. Like, are student loans affecting you? Are you living paycheck to paycheck? Do you feel anxiety frequently or stress at work? And some of these surveys can help an employer understand what they should be looking at solving, and then have a data-backed approach to take it to an executive team and say, this is what we learned from our employee base. Now we want to do something about it. And so it doesn't always have to be one-on-one conversations. You might want to get the ball rolling with something more general. Then you can solve more one-on-one problems. After that.
And we've had HR ask us, like, can you give us the survey questions of what to ask to? You probably get asked that as well. Like, how should we, I think the way you package the questions and what you're asking is going to also affect the results that you get. So you have to be very thoughtful about how you ask.
Yeah. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in. We're going to get into the Q&A, and I'm going to start with this one question that just came in and kind of tied into the final thought here. So the question that just came in was, how do financial wellness, mental health, and other wellness benefits help in recruiting and retention? And I'm going to start this answer with a stat that was shared, because it's almost the exact same between both of your individual benefits that you're offering for employers. 80% of employers, or excuse me, 80% of employees say they want financial wellness. And I'm pretty sure it's about 80 to 85% of employees also want mental health support from their employers. The employees are asking for both of your services, and they want the employee to provide those. And those that are getting those seem to have higher retention or better recruiting efforts, right? Like, talk about the uniqueness of companies that are offering benefits beyond just health and dental and a 401k. Like, how are they benefiting from having these more unique and more personalized benefits like mental health support and financial coaching?
There's so much to address in that. And we've talked to so many companies that come in different shapes and sizes. And so it's a little bit different for each company, but I look at just the local labor market. And the labor market here in Utah is really tough. We have a 1.9% unemployment, which means there are not a lot of people looking for jobs. And we have companies that are growing really quickly that need talent. And one of the ways that you can stand out is by differentiating yourself as an employer, right? We can be an employer of choice because we will show our employees that we care about them and their personal lives in a way that other employers do not. And that's how you win a talent battle. When you can say, this is how we care about you. We help you manage your personal finances. Yes, we provide 401k and health insurance, just like every other company in the Valley, but we will also help you manage your personal finances and give you access to a financial coach that can help you along the way. And we will give you access to a mental health platform where you can learn to have balanced mental health and where you can access therapists and practitioners when you need it. And I think that resonates really well with this next generation of employees.
Yeah.
In 5 years, more than 70% of the workforce will be Gen Z or millennials. And millennials and Gen Zers care about that more than this last generation did. So you need to start winning that battle now in recruiting. And the way that you do that is showing them that we offer more than just the traditional comp package.
Well, and if they're doing well financially, they're less likely to leave their job, right? So if you can help your employees win with their budget and, have retirement and they feel secure financially, they're not going to leave your job just to go find a bigger paycheck. They're going to be like, oh, I have what I need here. And if they enjoy that job, they'll stay. So, and I think the same thing plays with mental health too. One of the things that we've seen a lot is if from a recruiting and retention standpoint, it sends the message to the employees because the employers that implement our solution, they'll implement it for the employee and the whole family of the employee, right? So if I've got a daughter who's struggling with mental health, how much does that, mean to me as an employee to be like, oh, through my daughter can get the help that she needs through my employer. And that tells them they care about them, they care about their family. And so we're seeing a lot more of just better retention numbers and ability to attract talent, because they're able to send that message, because everyone wants to work for an employer who they feel like really cares about them. And if it's like, oh, my employer wants me to win financially and they want to help me and my family, be in a good place mentally, emotionally.
Well, and think about that on the retention side. Can you imagine having access to a mental health practitioner at your call whenever you need it, and then leaving the job and going somewhere else where you don't have that anymore? Like, that becomes a barrier to entry, right? It's a reason why someone
barrier
would
to exit.
A barrier to exit.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's these golden handcuffs, which most people think of as big bonuses and high compensation, but I think it applies in other ways.
Right.
I know from personal experience that people that I've talked to, when they first get hit with financial stress, the first thing they think of is, I need to find a new job. I don't know why that pops in their head first, but they could even be in an okay financial spot, but they have a financial emergency, right? A car breaks down, dishwasher goes out. And so often they think, I need a new employer, right? I need to make more money. And that's very rarely the actual solution. So if we can provide them a resource that can help them solve that problem when they have it.
Yeah, and you're probably right. It wasn't the solution.
Not here though, right?
Yeah, no. That's interesting though. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting thought.
And when we have this tight labor market like we do, people are always thinking the grass is greener on the other side. Someone else will pay me more to get there. And so you need a reason for them to stay with you longer. And these are two great reasons to stay with you longer. Sure. But if they just feel good generally, whether or not they know you care about the employer, if you've helped them with their personal financial needs and balance their mental life and anxiety, then they like the status quo. People love living in the status quo. It is a hassle to change jobs. People usually don't want to do that. And so if you can make them feel satisfied, and I would say even secure in what they're doing, they're not going to leave. They don't want to go anywhere else if they don't have to.
That's why that stat, like women were not changing jobs and were not getting promotions and things like that, because they had to maintain the status quo, because that change and adjustment is painful. It's hard for people.
Right. All right. We've got a couple more questions that came in here. We've considered early wage access. What's your experience with these types of benefits, and are they helpful? I'm assuming that goes to you. I don't even know what early.
I don't know what that means.
Is.
So early wage access is a newer form of a benefit where
getting paid like a couple days earlier, or whatever.
You get paid earlier, right? Which it's not always just a couple days. Sometimes it's like, hey, I'll take out a loan from my employer, and then I'll be paying that back by nature of my employment. They'll take some of that out of my paycheck.
This is to kind of combat the paycheck loan.
Well, it does combat a payday loan, right? You could go here instead of a high interest payday loan, but it actually perpetuates the problem of living paycheck to paycheck. And so I do think that there are certain employers with certain demographics where early wage access would make sense as a last resort option, but would very rarely be the solution to a problem. What you would want to do is layer in a real financial wellness solution into it that can prevent problems first. And then if they need it, that financial coach that you work with through your financial wellness provider could recommend you use your early wage access benefits. We've seen a lot of success in working with an employer that layered these two together to say, if you want early wage access or a loan from the company, you first have to talk to your Savology coach. That. And it's so much more effective, because otherwise you end up with employees that get stuck in the cycle because they borrowed money from their employer that they couldn't afford to pay back, and it's already coming out of their paycheck every time. And so not only do they live paycheck to paycheck, but they're living backwards a paycheck. And you don't want to get stuck in that cycle. So I usually caution against early wage access unless it's paired with other preventative measures.
Okay. And then going on the final question, we'll end here as we wrap up. But this is kind of one of those other kind of benefits that come about from these benefits. I think a benefit to the company that comes from this engagement and culture. So we talked about retention and recruiting, but just engagement and culture for those that are there and going to stay there. What are companies doing, or how are companies kind of benefiting from just getting more people engaged and using these type of benefits?
I think it becomes part of their life, right? And when I say that, I mean, you want work and personal lives to be as interconnected as possible, in the sense that when they feel harmony between those, they don't want to go anywhere. And when you can incorporate benefits that aren't just health insurance in your 401k, then they feel like the employer is taking care of these other elements in their life.
Mhm.
And that's when they can stay actively engaged with the employer, right? But there are statistics that show more than 70% of employees are either actively disengaged or disengaged at any level. And that means that they're not necessarily thrilled at being there. But if you can step up the game of the benefits and what you're doing to help these employees, suddenly they want to be there and they like being there, and they can promote that and they can talk about it, and they have uniform things to talk about at work, instead of just relying on health insurance, which now everyone provides. So I do think it helps a lot with engagement, and employers that implement not just financial wellness or mental health, but anything outside of a traditional benefit package often see a better return on culture than those who don't.
It seems like in the mental health space, employers are embracing mindfulness, breath work, yoga as like cultural, I don't know, touchstones, if you will, within the company, right? Like an opportunity to step away from the desk and do something different. Are you seeing, I'm assuming you're seeing positive effects, but like, what is that doing to the companies? Those are getting more popular over time?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a lot more meditation benefits being provided as a mainstream benefit. Therapy. In fact, SHRM just did the Society of Human Resource Managers did a survey, and the number was 92% of employers expect to increase their mental health benefits in 2022. And I think the number was like
89.
80.
Yep.
Yeah, for financial. So organizations have had this like awakening of sorts, where it's like all of a sudden these two things, both of us are like at the very top of the awareness and purchase cycle for companies. So what happens on the engagement side with that is that we're seeing that, I mean, think about how distracting it is if you are fighting with your spouse at home. Like, I know if me and my husband, if I'm mad at him, like it is really hard for me to get any work done, right? Or, you're just feeling really depressed. It's going to be hard for you to be motivated. So any kind of mental health challenge that you're experiencing on the, more on like the crisis side of the spectrum is going to be super interruptive to your work.
Yeah.
Then on the proactive care side of the spectrum, I mean, and we've seen this because there's so much prevalence in the market now, among businesses to provide mindfulness and to bring in virtual yoga and to teach breath work and things like that to their employees, because they have already seen the benefits, because that has been going on for probably like 4 or 5 years that people have been starting to experiment with that. And I mean, even massage, when we were doing on-site massage, they would see that like their employees were more relaxed and less stressed and happier. And like, it's like an 86% reduction in stress immediately following a massage that lasts for like 2 days.
Feels like a week.
Yeah. So employers are like tuned into this, and they're seeing the results that are perpetuating this being like a high priority for them.
Awesome. We'll go ahead and end it there. Thank you, everybody who joined us. Before we go, Spencer, where can we learn more about Savology?
So Savology.com, we offer financial wellness directly to employers, but if I can add a quick plug for Nivati, through our partnership with Nivati, you can get access to the majority of the Savology benefits partnered with Nivati, so you can tackle both mental health and financial wellness at the same time. And for that, I would refer you to Nivati to initiate those conversations.
Yeah, and then Nivati.com.
Yep.
Also, I think on Nivati.com, there is a manager training handbook. So to go back to how to have these conversations with managers, there's a great handbook available on Nivati.com as well. But yeah, if you want both of these in one solution, Nivati.com has that available, or Savology.com if you need that. So thank you, everybody, for attending. This will conclude our session for today, and we look forward to doing this again in the future.
Yeah, we'll send out a copy of this recording for those that weren't able to attend, or for those who did and might want to share it a little bit farther. So I would look at maybe the next 2 days to get a copy.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks, guys.